Yeah, Richard, my one big thing this week, taking a look at the Saudi Green Initiative and a report done by MIT called the Green Future Index. Context here, Saudi Green Initiative, we've talked about it on this program. It's a concerted effort, coordinated effort by Saudi Arabia to reach a set of national goals within a few decades. And that places the kingdom in a position to combat the effects of climate change and put in place sustainability measures to basically put Saudi Arabia into the future when it comes to this stuff. So for any nation, this is a huge undertaking, but especially so for Saudi Arabia, which relies, as we all know, heavily on oil for national income and to power its own growth. And listeners or viewers of this podcast know very well how much the kingdom is growing recently. So it's a bit of a challenge. You want to balance economic growth with reaching these goals. What's good about the Saudi Green Initiative is that it's not just a good PR move, although it is a very good PR move. It actually eventually is a good business model and is much needed for Saudi Arabia. For one, temperatures are rising significantly in the Middle East, and recent scientific reports suggest they're rising faster in the Middle East region than elsewhere in the world, putting it at greater risk. And this is something, Richard, that the Saudis know. They're not shying away from this at this point. They know it's a challenge. This paragraph from the Saudi Green Initiative website, quote, "The need to reverse the effects of climate change can clearly be seen across the Middle East and Africa, from increased desertification, and dust storms that impact air quality, to dwindling fresh water supplies. Rising temperatures and extreme weather events already affect quality of life and economic opportunities." And then it says Saudi Arabia is spearheading far-reaching, tailored action and is proud to play a key role in leading international collaborations for a more sustainable global future. So they know this. They know the challenges. We talked about this on the podcast, Richard, that they sort of are facing it head on and are ready to take it on. So huge goal for the Saudi Green Initiative, big plans, long time frame. What's going to happen to 2050, 2060, and what's happening now? So this is sort of where I started and kind of just checking in on this initiative. The Saudi Green Initiative includes a plan, as we know, to plant 10 billion trees in the kingdom and 50 billion trees in the Middle East region by 2050, and 450 million trees, and rehabilitate 8 million hectares of degraded land by 2030, which it says would cut about 200 million tons of carbon emissions per year. So I saw that, Richard, and I was like, how's it going? So far, Saudi Arabia has planted 18 million trees, which is a large amount of trees. Hard to understate that. And of those, there are 13 million mangroves, which are, as I understand it, the best in terms of combating climate change and global warming.
Interesting.
That's just within the first year plus. Obviously a long way to go, but pretty impressive start so far there. You'll see big jumps too in this effort, Richard, as the years go forward. Places like King Salman Park in Riyadh, which will be 6.4 square miles of parkland and cultural spaces, will add hundreds of thousands or millions of trees to the overall goal. I don't know. We actually need to do a segment on this in the future. King Salman Park, something that was announced in 2019, and you see signs for it when you drive by that area in Riyadh, and you don't see anything else because there's a huge fence with King Salman on it. It says park coming soon, essentially. But if you look at things online for this and just kind of wrap your head around the size and scope of this, it's 6 times the size of Central Park. It's going to be almost totally trees. So they're planning a huge, massive version of Central Park in the middle of Riyadh. Things like that will jolt the kingdom forward in its tree planting goals. Of course, it's so much more than trees. It's protection of large areas from development, upwards of 30% to be protected in Saudi Arabia. And then we have a totally different topic of commitment to renewable energy solutions, sustainability, et cetera. So measuring how it's going so far, there is a new index created 2 years ago by MIT called the Green Future Index. And it's sort of considered one of the more authentic reports that signal the progress made by countries in terms of sustainability. It's conducted annually, measures the extent to which 76 countries that participate and territories are moving toward a green future by reducing their carbon emissions, developing clean energy, innovating in green sectors, and preserving their environment, as well as the degree to which governments are implementing effective climate policies. So it's really a holistic look at how a country's doing at fighting climate change and mitigating its effects and embracing sustainability. So there's good news and bad news, Richard, in this report for Saudi Arabia. I saw the report mentioned in news articles that highlighted mostly the good. But when you get into it, it isn't all good. Saudi Arabia was categorized as a quote climate laggard, which is one of four categories. It's the second worst, along with 20 other countries, and then there's a bottom 17 countries that make up the 77 countries. The first is green leaders, and then greening middle, and then the one that Saudi Arabia is in, climate laggards. And Saudi Arabia is sort of in the middle of this group. And then there's finally climate abstainers. And I guess that just means that they're just not doing anything or don't believe in it. I don't know. But number one is Iceland. And last place in this study, Richard, I'll let you take a guess at it if you want.
Last place?
Last place, number 77 out of 77.
Um, Alabama?
If
Oh,
they
sorry.
were
Oh,
if they declared independence from the United States, there is no doubt in my mind that they would beat out Iran as last place. Just thought that
last
was
place.
interesting.
I
Yeah.
mean, India is still doing so much coal.
Yeah. So Saudi Arabia moved ahead of Australia, which I thought was interesting. They seem
Yeah.
pretty lib on this stuff, but they also have a lot of coal interests in Australia. They obviously do a lot of mining, as we know from our segments on mining and minerals on the 966. But there is good news, and always take the bad news first. So you end with the good news and things seem happy. Saudi Arabia did jump 10 spots from last year's report. So we sort of see these policies coming into effect, and you can see it in the individual sort of measurements they have. They do an overall ranking, which is what Saudi Arabia jumped 10 spots in, but then they have carbon emissions, they're 19 out of 77.
Yeah.
Energy transition, they're at 12 out of 77. So some areas they're really doing very well globally. I should note, to our disappointment, of course, that the United States is not in that top category. They are in the second category of greening middle. So
What's their
we have some work to do.
what's their rank? What's our rank?
I think we're 22nd.
Uh,
Which is kind of disappointing because, we can do better than that. Let me see. The greening middle, United States, 21st. So we're just on the cusp of being green leaders. But let's be real. We know that we're not really there as a country
well,
yet. So,
it might be interesting after, in a few years after this, with this debt reduction act that had so much renewable energy and emissions reduction that was recently passed. So I missed it. Sorry, who's last?
last is Iran.
Iran. All
Yeah.
right. I
Which I
figured it
thought
was a
was kind
poor
of
country,
interesting.
but
Yeah.
that's interesting. I would have thought it'd be like North Korea or something, but maybe they just they don't have enough industry to worry about.
I think that they were not on this report. So there's only 77 countries. So there
Yeah,
are
that's
what
true.
100
That's
countries that are
true.
just not.
Yeah.
They're not in for this.
Yeah.
They're just saying, yeah, we don't. So they're below. Maybe there's a fifth category of we have no idea. I can't imagine North Korea prioritizing sustainability in any way other than in terms of food supply. But yeah, Richard, I just think this was cool because it's like we have this. We're going to look for at the SGI over the years coming forward, and then we're going to compare it to how it's doing. I saw an article, by the way, about this that claimed that Saudi Arabia was number one in producing renewable energy, and they credited this report. And this was in Arab News and a few other places. I didn't see anything about that in the report, so I didn't want to mention that. But that was something the Ministry of Energy claimed, and
Right.
there's just not in the report. But I just think this is interesting. We have a pretty credible now, I guess U.S. based, MIT based study on how to evaluate how a country is doing in the pursuit toward sustainability, and then we have Saudi Arabia's plan, and we can already see it working, and that's my one big thing this week.
I loved it. That's very cool. And it's encouraging. The two things you said where Saudi Arabia was in the top 20, managing energy transition, which
Mm-hmm.
is, obviously bodes well for keeping and moving up the ranks. And the emissions, I guess the net emissions, which is interesting, since, they're not looking at obviously, emissions resulting from exported crude because that's at the host country or the purchasing country. So that's a different deal. But that's a really good one. I had a really interesting conversation the other day, earlier this week with a buddy of ours in Riyadh, and he said, "Richard, you know what? It was 5 o'clock there." He said, "All right, so it's early April. It's 5 o'clock. It's 83 degrees." And he said, that you'd expect it to be hotter than that, and it will get much, much hotter." And he said, and this is anecdotal in the extreme, but this is someone who's been in the kingdom for a good bit. He said, this thing seemed cooler to me. And he said it rained 25 days out of 30 in January. You remember, I mean, it seemed like it was raining all the time, which is, again, is unusual. He also said he really believes, this is him, entirely anecdotal. He really believes that it feels cooler, that he's in Riyadh. It feels cooler because there's been so much greening going on. There's more green space. Again, entirely anecdotal, but there for what it's worth. The larger trends, as you noted, clearly, the average temperature is going up. But it's interesting, as these 18 million trees go in, and probably a lot of them have been in Riyadh, if you start to see a change.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if just like having more trees around you and having it be just generally less dusty and flat and sandy around you also adds to the aesthetic sort of feeling that it is cooler, and there's more shade generally. I think they're so early on in how many trees they're planting in Riyadh that I'm not sure it would actually, and like you noted, it's an anecdotal thing. I'm not sure how much of a difference it actually makes yet. But I do think that when King Salman Park is fully open and there's a massive, huge green area in the middle, I can't imagine that not having an impact. Yeah.
And on these numbers, I mean, the big deal is going to be, reducing emissions and not only capturing it, that sort of thing with green space and cooling, but I mean, they have, significant, renewable energy plans. So, and obviously I have natural gas plans. So yeah, this is, but again, going back to the MIT Green Future Index, which is really cool. Thank you for sharing that with me. I like what their trendings are, the areas that they're trending in, those things seem like they would keep, it's an additive thing. They keep getting better at this and they'll keep getting better at the entire ranking.
Yeah. And Richard, the one area in which they dropped significantly, I think they dropped 27 points, was in clean innovation. And I thought that was interesting because I don't really know totally what that means, but it seems like that's more relative to other countries versus an overall goal of reaching sustainability. So I thought that was kind of interesting. It's like, what happened there? Did 26 other countries get more innovative? So I don't know what that means.
That is interesting because yeah, especially and I'm just guessing, if you're talking about carbon capture, which is really what they've been pushing very hard at the COP level and the UN level, which global level, any kind of discussion having climate change, they want to say, look, let's not just do reducing emissions. Let's talk about how much carbon we can capture and take out of the environment. That's something they really want to become very proficient at. I don't know if that's in that area, but you'd think clean technology that would lump in there, but who knows?
Yeah. And the billions of dollars they're putting into green hydrogen, I mean, that might be part of the energy transition category, not clean innovation, but I'm sure there's a lot of innovations going on at the Air Product NEOM JV that's happening there.
But, as you say, that may be attributed to the US, that's a US company. So maybe that innovation is not, does not go on to the Saudi ledger.
Let's see the US get to the top category, by the way.
Yeah,
Richard.
exactly.
We got to see that.
I'll be interested. This is great. It's like I have a rooting interest. Obviously, we all have a rooting interest. This is our planet. But it'd be nice to see us, our country, get into the top tier.
Yeah.
I don't want to. No more relegation for the USA.
No, being first in the second category, it's almost like hey, you're not quite there yet, guys.
Exactly.
And this is a US based study, so there's no cheerleading going on. But yeah, very interesting.